urging President Donald Trump and ending a 4-year era of bullish rule. And as power ebbs away from the 74-year-old Trump, different countries are preparing for a Democrat administration that has vowed to repair the damage done. But what does that mean for Kenya? Already, President Uhuru Kenyatta has congratulated President-elect Biden for his emphatic win and described him as a friend of Kenya. Kenyatta, in a statement, said Biden helped renew Kenya-U.S. ties. And let us to speak to Elijah Munyi, an assistant professor at international political economy at USIU, on what a Biden presidency means for Kenya. Prof, thank you for talking to us here on KTN News Center this morning. So what does this mean for Kenya, Biden presidency come January 2020, on January 2021 on the 20th, once he's sworn in as the 46th president of the U.S.?
Thank you very much for having me. It means a lot of things. Some are clear. Some are things we are going to have to wait and see what his actual policy is going to be. So we can start on what we all know is going to happen. I think one of the things that Joe Biden will bring in is a revitalization of multilateralism. So I think if there's anybody who is more relieved in the world today, is anybody who heads an international organization, WHO, WTO, the World Trade Organization, things like NATO, things like the United Nations. So for Kenya and for many other African countries, this is something that the United States is going to provide better leadership than the Trump administration has done. And therefore, we are going to see a bit more vibrant participation by Kenya and other countries in the multilateral organizations like the ones I've mentioned. Secondly, I think very importantly for Kenya, and it's not very clear how this goes, but the Trump presidency actually had really concentrated a lot on Kenya as one of the strategic partners, important African strategic partners. That importance is highlighted by the United States choosing Kenya to be the first sub-Saharan country before South Africa, before Nigeria, before anybody else, to negotiate for a free trade agreement with, and this is serious. So that free trade agreement, which we are negotiating with the United States now, is a reflection of how important the Trump presidency has taken us. Even if the negotiations go on, and I think the negotiations for the free trade agreement will go on, and particularly if the Congress becomes Democrat, we are not very certain if the Biden presidency will ratify, and if maybe the Democratic Congress will ratify that free trade agreement. So I think this is a big issue for us. This is something that's going to hang in the balance for the next few months as we are waiting to see. And in connection with the free trade agreement, which we have been negotiating, of course, with the United States, is the whole issue of the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act. The reason why we want to get into the free trade agreement is because AGOA is almost coming to an end, and we were not sure in 2025, and we were not sure if AGOA was going to be extended. So Kenya was being better prepared by negotiating for that bilateral agreement. All right. I think the Democratic Congress and the Democratic President are more likely to extend AGOA. And if AGOA were to be extended, that would sort of nullify and preempt the benefits that an FTA would give us.
All right. So Prof. So, Prof, are you because when I hear your argument in terms of whether the trade deals, the trade ties that Kenya already has, after the president visited the White House in 2018, my understanding is that your argument is based on the fact that should the Congress have more Republicans in office, then it means the trade deals between Kenya and the U.S. is based on whether the Congress, which is more of the Republicans, will support it or not?
Yeah, I think if the Congress is more Republican, I think they are likely to sanction, which is to ratify the deal that is going to be reached between the two administrations, Kenya's and the United States. A Democratic Congress perhaps will want to relook more keenly at this deal. And there are many things to look at. For example, actually, some of the Democratic members have already been sort of criticizing the deal about what it's going to do for climate change and things like that, labor regulations and the kind of things that Democrats are concerned with. So, well, for us, it would have been an easier path to the ratification of the FTA if Trump won. That is not to say that Biden will not, but I think what is going to happen is that there's going to be a little bit more scrutiny from Democrats on the merits of this FTA.
All right.
So we can go with it, but I think we might expect, or we should launch a bit more diplomatic political engagement with the Democrats now to lobby them on why we think this FTA is important. And this is something actually I pointed out some 2-3 months earlier, that we, in anticipation of a potential Democratic presidency and Congress, this is something we already should have been doing, talking to them.
All right, so let's look at probably now, away from the trade deals that, what you've explained to us on what Kenya needs to expect when it comes to the relationship with the president-elect once sworn in next year. So Kenya has been at the forefront in the fight against terrorism in Somalia, and the U.S. has also had has also experienced, the war against terrorism. And what do we expect from the Biden's presidency in terms of supporting Kenya in the war against terrorism?
I think this won't change much. I think both administrations are very focused on that. And therefore, I do expect a continuation of the beefing up of the capabilities for East Africa, for Kenya, for Ethiopia, for Uganda. So as you remember, one of the things that happened before the Obama administration came to an end was the procurement of some aircraft for these kinds of activities. And I expect this is going to resume. Probably the only contention between Biden and Trump was the extent to which the Africa Command for the United States, in the last 2 years, I'm not sure if it's because of COVID or other reasons, they have not participated in the regional trainings for different armies around East Africa. Justified accord and things like shared accord. This is something I think that will resume more robustly. So the Democrats, I think, will have a more traditional engagement. You remember Obama's ambassador here, Godek. He was very much about terrorism and counter-terrorism and things like that. The current ambassador is actually doing very well, but he's very focused on development and commercial ties. So I think we are likely to see a more traditional engagement, which means things like security and counterterrorism. Mm-hmm. But of course, that also depends on what happens in terms of COVID and maybe new attacks by Al-Shabaab and other groups.
All right. So, Prof, the U.S. can we say then that the U.S. will also continue seeking to ensure that Kenya continues to play that crucial role, constructive leadership role and of the peacekeeping process in South Sudan, given its tremendous leverage on that country's leadership?
I think so. I think Kenya has built a very interesting and good relationship, and I think actually for both President Kenyatta and other presidents, we've maintained a good relationship, which makes sure that in almost all administrations, our strategic importance is recognized and supported. So I think that will continue. Recently, now, for instance, the fight against terrorism has gone, it's the use of drones, and Kenya is really needed, and there's a lot of partnership to enable those kinds of activities. So I think Kenya is going to continue, but that doesn't mean that we should also not be lobbying. We need also to we need to heighten up our diplomacy and make sure that Kenya is recognized as such. And I think the passage of the FTA will be a key test for that, the extent to which we are able to persuade the Republicans and the Democrats about the need for this.
All right. And so, Prof, let's talk about the funding. During Trump's administration, we saw his administration cut funding to the African continent due to matters corruption. Again, funding in Kenya recently was also cut when it comes to matters health, fighting malaria in the country. And that has been a major concern for the African leadership, and especially here in Kenya. So what are we likely to see, with the Biden leadership in terms of funding?
I think this is going to be very crucial. I think this is going to be interesting. For us, we can say come January 20th and maybe up to January 30th, I think the most immediate thing is for us to observe who Biden is going to put in the State Department, State and Defense. particularly state, who is going to be the Secretary of State, are they people we think or who are going to have an African mindset in their thinking? Probably, I suspect because of China, even Biden is going to be really focused on Asia and containing China and what's going on in the South China Sea. What has been happening is that the Republican administration of Trump really tried to steer relations with Africa from aid, health funding, and so on to commercial ties. And actually, it's something that had both bipartisan support. So in 2018, the United States started what they call the Development Finance Corporation, which is this idea that let's change how we engage with Africa. Let's provide debt financing. Let's provide financing investment. Let's change. So because it had bipartisan support, I suspect that it's something that is going to go on. The engagement might still be skewed towards more commercial relations. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think there'll be much more emphasis on things like anti-corruption. So this is something the United States has pulled out of from things like democracy, corruption, and so on. I think with Biden, we are going back to a more traditional role of the United States in monitoring and oversight of corruption and democratic gains and so on. So those cuts could go on, and they will go on in tandem with a more realignment towards commercial financing for trade and investment.
So, Prof, are you trying to say, because the focus has always been, there's been an argument that let me just move a bit, let me move away from Kenya a bit, but now to the African continent just for a second. And the focus has been, the Western countries are looking at Africa, leaning towards the Asian countries. You talk about China in terms of trade. So are we likely to see the U.S. becoming more interested in terms of trade with the African continent?
I think so. So China is providing a lot of competition for the United States and European countries. And that competition, from the eyes of the United States and Europe, has been seen mostly in terms of China's commercial success in Africa. So China is doing a lot of, it's a big exporter to Africa. It's selling a lot of its goods to Africa, from everything, from clothes to planes to military equipment. So yes, that bothers the United States, that bothers the EU countries, and they want to compete with China. So because of that Chinese competition, I think, yes, there's going to be a little shift from that development mindset of the 1980s and 90s and 2000s, perhaps, to a more commercial orientation. But also the other thing that is going to be important, of course, in the next 2-3 years is health intelligence and health collaboration. And, this is something, again, I think we will expect a bit more of U.S. leadership. The U.S. has, the Trump administration has pulled out of this, things like CDC a little bit. So now we have an African CDC, which is being funded by China. I think the U.S. will want to reassert its leadership in things like health intelligence and collaborations and helping African countries. So in terms of Africa, I think also you see what's happening, for example, in Tanzania and in Cote d'Ivoire. I think these are signs of the U.S. withdrawal of emphasis on democracy and things like that. So I think with Biden, again, it's more traditional. Those are things that will be highlighted, and so democracy will become, democratic gains and democracy will become important for Biden's administration.
All right. Thank you so much, Elijah Munyi. That reminds me about, Trump ordering the cut of funds to the World Health Organizations. But, Prof, just stay with me because I want us to take a short commercial break. We'll come back to continue having this discussion on what the President-elect Biden's presidency means to the African continent, specifically the country of Kenya.